So being on the line now 6, 7 months, it's been a wonderful experience. There have been some amazing people that I've come in contact with, flight attendants, pilots, crew, ground control. I mean, the whole thing, it's been a really great experience. And everyone has been really wonderful. That being said, it's not a perfect world. And occasionally you're going to meet some characters that, kind of give you a little bit of an issue, kind of give a little bit of a problem. Such a thing did happen to me a couple months of first getting on the line, and I've really debated on whether I need to talk about it on this channel, and if I did, in what kind of light I would put it in. Because I'm really not the kind of person that is about gossip or wanting to put people down or put people in a bad light. But yet, after a lot of consideration, I've decided to go ahead and talk about this simply and if only to use it as a learning tool, for other flight attendants that might be coming on the line, even for new flight attendants or even experienced flight attendants that didn't really know that this sort of thing happened or what you can do to resolve this particular incident. So today we're going to talk about that and shed some light on, how to deal with a situation that might be less than ideal. Let's go. Before we get started on this story, guys, I just wanted to thank you for stopping by the channel. If you are new here, welcome. I do a lot of stories and a lot of tips and tricks on how to become a flight attendant. If you're interested in this information, I would very much invite you to check out the rest of my videos out. Possibly subscribe, that would be great. I also started a buy a coffee for the channel as well. If you want to support the channel, the link is down below. And we'll just welcome. All right, let's get on with the story. So let's go ahead and set the stage. I am in the middle of a 3-day rotation, and on this particular leg, I am heading to Tampa, Florida. We are in the middle of boarding, and everything is going excellently. We are a crew of 4, and my particular position on this leg is first class assist. Now, if you're not familiar with the positions, I'm going to go ahead and make another video explaining a little bit more in detail what the positions are on most of our flights. And but for now, just know that there are typically 2 flight attendants in the front, 2 flight attendants in the back of the plane, and we kind of cover the ground. I am assistant to the flight leader, which is in the front. And when I'm done assisting him or her, then I go to the back of the plane, assisting the other flight attendants and kind of go back and forth where I'm kind of needed, sort of a thing, okay? So we'll just say that for now. So we're in the middle of our boarding and everything's going great. I, being flight lead assist, am just welcoming everyone on board, saying hello, welcome, might be directing them to their seats or helping them, with any questions that they may have as they come on board. And there was a lady who seemed very nice, who was very energetic, shall we say. And she proceeded to hand me a little container of cut up limes. So she's all, here you go. I know you guys don't always have limes, but here you go. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And if you know, sometimes with our catering, we're supposed to get limes for our drinks. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It depends on what catering has available at the same time. But this lady proceeded to give me a little container of limes. So again, I thanked her and I put it on the side. Well, my flight leader at that moment saw exactly what had happened, took the limes and then returned it to the lady and said, thank you, but we cannot accept these. And I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I just kind of stood to the side watching what was happening. And this lady seemed rubbed a little the wrong way. She might have gotten maybe a little bit offended and just like, oh, well, okay. And then just went back to her seat. And later, my flight leader explained to me that we're not allowed to accept food like that, which makes perfect sense because, quite frankly, we don't know, where these limes came from. And it's not a good idea to serve these limes to our other customers in case of any kind of contamination or whatever like that, right? So it's better safe than sorry to just serve what we are catered to our guests. Makes perfect sense. Okay, I got it, right? But again, this lady might have been a little bit offended by it. Well, we're in the middle of, we're finishing our boarding, we're doing our safety checks, all that sort of stuff, making sure that the plane is ready to go. We have pretty much, for the most part, I'd say about an 80–85% full flight, maybe actually a little less, maybe about 70%, right? And so we're ready to go. Our first class cabin is actually full. And this lady is now sitting next to another gentleman, an older gentleman. They're getting along great. Everyone's happy and we're ready to go. And we've taken off. All right, so we're now up in the air, but the captain has let us know that we are to remain seated until further notice. Reason being is because the captain was expecting a good amount of turbulence, and there was. There was probably about 30, maybe 40 minutes worth of turbulence where we had to remain in our seats and wait until it was safe to get up to continue our service. Now, if you know, during a flight, there are certain stages of the flight where we kind of give certain service points, if you will, right? And depending on how long the flight is, determines how many service points we kind of hit upon, okay? Because we were delayed 30–40 minutes because of turbulence, naturally, our delay in providing that service had happened. So once we were given the okay from the captain to go ahead and continue to get up and continue our service, we'd gotten up and tried to catch up because we were delayed. So we're doing our very best, getting up, we're taking care of first class, making sure they have their drinks, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we had given our first round of drinks. As we had finished with that, we are now starting to prepare our meals and such. At this point, the lady who had given us our limes had grown, shall we say, a little impatient. She wanted a second or third round of drinks and stuff like that. So now at this point, I'm thinking, maybe she came on board really happy and excited and very animated because I don't know, possibly she came on already having a drink or two, okay? This is one of the things that you have to kind of pay attention to when you have your people come on board to make sure that everyone's doing well. Because if they're a little bit inebriated or anything else like that, then they might cause a problem on the flight and we might not allow them to fly in the first place. So we don't know, but we are starting to get the idea or the hint that maybe she did have a drink or two before coming on board. And now she's on possibly her second drink. And I'm starting to wonder here, okay? So the gentleman that sat next to her, they started forming a little bit of a bond. They started talking a lot, laughing amongst themselves, which was fine, no problem. But again, she just became a little impatient. So she wanted another round of drinks, then yet another. I approached her and I'd apologized to her, trying to be empathetic and say, no problem, we'll be right with you. We're just trying to cover everyone else. And as soon as we get there, I'll be right with you, So we're doing everything we can. My flight leader has noticed that she is getting a little bit, excited, a little impatient, right? But we're just doing our very best to be the best flight attendants we can and serving the meals as soon as we can. Well, at this point, things took a little bit a turn for the worst. So now at this point, the gentleman that was sitting next to the lady that had given us the limes started also getting a little impatient and, quite frankly, loud. The rest of first class was very calm, very cool, but there was a point in time when we were in the middle of serving the meals to first class that this gentleman had decided to give us a very loud opinion. He was very loud in telling us that we were the worst service he had ever experienced, right? And he was very, very loud about it. Of course, everyone in first class notices and turns their heads and trying to figure out what's going on. The first time he did this, I was literally right next to them, right? And at this point, I'm kind of trying to diffuse the situation and say, okay, so sir, let me just do what I can. And I mean, what else can I do, right? This guy's just yelling at the top of his lungs. And then I went to my flight leader explaining to her what had happened because she's in the galley fixing the meals as I'm taking the meals from the galley and serving them to the rest of first class one at a time. So the more we're serving the meals, I think there were probably approximately 16, maybe 20 people in our first class. And uh, so the more meals we served, the more drinks they wanted. It was all about the drinks, right? I want another drink. I want another drink. I want another drink. So they were getting very loud. And I swear to you that within about 10 minutes of time, this gentleman was yelling at the top of his lungs, saying that it was the worst service he had ever experienced in first class. And the lady with the limes kind of was laughing and kind of like egging him on. It was a really weird dynamic. It was a really, really weird situation to where these two strangers had come on board, formed this little alliance, and proceeded to kind of like give us a really, really hard time. The first time that he had yelled that this was the worst service he had ever received, well, for 1 second, I'm just like, oh my God, really? Are we really doing that horribly? You know, I got a little, paranoid and a little bit, oh no, we suck, right? But when I looked around to the rest of first class, I was kind of like, well, wait a minute. No, everyone seems to be okay. Everyone seems to be really nice and calm, and everyone seems to be happy with our service, right? After he had yelled this, one of the other first class customers had spoken in my ear and said, don't even worry about them. You guys are doing fine. You guys are doing just fine. And I'm like, okay, cool, thank you. Because for a second I thought, man, what are we doing wrong, right? But as time went on, these two individuals just became a lot more aggressive. They became like a little Bonnie and Clyde sort of a situation where they were just being as loud as they possibly could be, and a little bit inappropriate, to be honest with you. And the sad thing is that these people were not teenagers. They weren't even in their 20s, you know? The lady was probably in her mid to late 30s. The gentleman was easily in his 60s, maybe 65 or whatever. And these individuals were, they were adults. You know what I'm saying? So when we kind of started investigating the situation a little bit more, we discovered that these two individuals had been flying with our airline for a long time. They were, those frequent flyer people. They knew exactly what the etiquette is on a plane and what it should not be on a plane. So it just really surprised me that they would act in such an aggressive way, right? But it is what it is. So at that moment, about 2 months or so of first coming on the line, I discovered that unfortunately, that Instagram, TikTok culture, where you see all this kind of crazy stuff that happens on airplanes, isn't just for show. Unfortunately, it does actually happen. So this was my introduction to, something, not as pretty that happens on the airline. Now again, folks, I just want to reiterate that the only reason I'm sharing this story, again, is not to gossip. It's really more to educate. I know there are a lot of flight attendants or future flight attendants that could hopefully learn and use this information wisely on how to deal with unruly passengers when it happens. Hopefully it will never happen to you in your career, but chances are that you are going to face something like this. So the better armed you are, the more informed you are, the better. So I just wanted to make sure that we got that out of the way, because again, I really did debate on whether I was going to share this story, because I did not want it to come off in any bad light or as a gossip or anything like that. Really more as an educational tool. All right, back to the story. So at this point, again, we are trying to do the very best we can, trying to calm them down, trying to not make a scene or more of a scene that has already been made. And when we got to the point of serving them their meals, literally right as we're about to serve their meals, the gentleman, yet once again, at the very top of his lungs, "This is the worst service I've ever had," right? At that point in time, my flight leader had it. She was done. And she did something that I did not even know you could do, okay? So she takes their meals and puts them back in the galley. She does not serve them because she would literally have them in her hand, and she was about to put down their trays. He says these words again for the 10th time, and she takes their trays back to the galley, calls me to the galley, and says, "Hey, I need to talk with you." And I said, "Okay, great." And she says in the galley to me, she says, "Oh, you know what? We're gonna have to move these people." I said, "What do you mean move them? We're like an hour into the flight. We still have another 3 or 4 hours. What do you mean move them? They're in first class." And she's all, "Well, we have seats in the back. We're gonna have to move them to the back." I was like, "What? You can do that?" I just never even knew you could do that. And she's all, "No, absolutely, we have to, because if we don't, they're gonna make life miserable for all of our other first class people." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I mean, sure." So at that point, what ended up happening is that we went ahead and called the flight deck. Now, calling the flight deck, we're letting the captain know exactly what's going on, how it's going on, why it's going on, so they're in the know, okay? So at this point, we start trying to figure out what is going to happen. Well, meanwhile, as this is happening, these two individuals start getting into it with the other two people across the aisle of them, who these people are completely minding their business, but for some reason, they started having a little bit of words, right, with other passengers in first class. So I was like, wow, I can't even believe they're doing that. So this lady with the limes started insulting other people across the aisle from her, also being in first class. So at that point, we're letting everyone know. So we called the flight deck, let them know what's going on, let them know what was happening, and what we were going to do. We also call our flight attendants in the back, letting them know what's going to happen, that to please reserve 2 seats in the very back, one on each side of the plane, because we're going to have to, probably put one there and keep one in first class. So at this point, we actually had another first class passenger come up to us in the galley and said, "Hey, if you guys need some extra help in taking care of these people, please let me know. I will be more than happy to assist you." Okay? So we thanked this passenger and we said, "Well, thank you very much. We'll let you know. But for now, just go back to see we'll see what we can do," right? So at this point, we had to move them. So first, we moved the lady. We asked her to get up and go all the way to the back to sit back there because, she was causing a commotion. At this point in time, though, all of the, everything kind of went out the window because, of course, now the lady is all like, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was causing a disturbance," right? She literally said those words, right? "I didn't know I was causing a disturbance." And my flight leader is like, "I'm sorry. Nope, you're going to have to go to the bank. Please go with us." And my flight leader was very polite about it, stern, but polite, right? And so ultimately we had to move her to the back of the plane. The gentleman stayed in first class, but the funny thing is that a few minutes after we had moved the lady to the back of the plane, the gentleman started running off his mouth. And in the mood that my flight leader was in, she wasn't having it. So after he said another few choice words, she said, "That's it. Now you're going to the back of the plane." So we ended up moving him also to the back of the plane on the other side of the aisle. And it was just something that I never thought I would witness, right? It was just something that I just never thought you could do, right? But it was happening, it was going on. And unfortunately, we did our very best to be patient with our customers, to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they just kept getting really, really aggressive to the point where they were disturbing the rest of the first class. And possibly it could have gotten to the point where they were so out of hand that they could have started affecting how we're running, the flight. And that's where it's a big no-no. That's where it's like, you know what? All bets are off, because if you're gonna start into a situation where you're gonna possibly put the flight and other passengers in some sort of a danger, that's it. That's exactly where, you know, all bets are off. And that's exactly why my flight leader decided to go ahead and put them in the back of the plane. So that is where we are in our story. But there's more. Okay, so now at this point in the story, we know that our two individuals are now seated in the back of the plane, separated. We didn't have a lot of passengers in the very back of the plane, so luckily we had the availability of seats in order to move them in the first place. Again, I'm brand new to the line, but just logically, for me, I would never think that you could move paying customers in first class to the back of the plane. But apparently you can, and all in the name of safety, all in the name of making sure that the rest of the passengers aren't put in any harm's way or disturbed. And it was a necessary but drastic move, but it was the necessary thing to do. So my flight leader at this point had to spend a lot of time with them, talking to them in the back. I went ahead and took care of first class, trying to take care of them, you know, with their drinks, their meals, and the whole 9 yards. While I'm doing this, a lot of my first class passengers were, you know, thanking us for moving them. Really, it's like, oh my God, thank you so much. They were so loud. They were this, they were that, they were that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm so sorry you guys had to go through that. Please, I apologize. What, you know, is there anything else I can get for you? Blah, blah, blah. The captain had also called us and said, hey, look, do we need to make an emergency landing? You know, we're probably somewhere over like, I don't know, Utah or something like that on our way to Florida. And, you know, when there's an emergency like this, the captain will go ahead and make an emergency landing in the closest available airport. My flight leader and I discussed it, and she said, you know what? I think we're okay for right now. Let's just continue with the flight. So my flight leader had told the flight deck to not worry about that. If there's anything that changes, if we do feel that we need to make an emergency landing, we'll let you know. But for right now, we're okay. We're handling the situation. So captain's like, okay, fine, no problem. Just let me know, keep me informed. Okay, great. So I'm taking care of all of first class, doing the best I possibly can, especially not having any first class experience on my own. So this was a little bit of throwing me in the deep end, but I was totally fine with it, no problem. Meanwhile, my flight leader is in the back with our two individuals, making sure that they are taken care of, telling them to, you know, that they're to remain there for the rest of the flight, that they are not allowed to come back into first class, that they had to remain there till the very, very end. All right, so here's what happens next. So after my flight leader had a discussion with them to tell them that they were to stay seated where they were, she comes back up to me and starts talking to me about options. All right, what do we need to do? Let's make sure we finish with service with first class, which at that point I had pretty much finished for the most part. She again went through first class and apologized herself for everything that had been going on. Our first class passengers were wonderful. They were very understanding, they were very sympathetic, they were on our side, and they made this transition and this situation so much easier to deal with, okay? So it was great to have those people on board with us. But at this point, my flight leader was like, you know, how are we gonna handle this once we land, right? So I'm like, you know, there's a good chance, I mean, the first thing is that we just bring them back into first class, have them take their original seats, and then they go off as originally intended. Or we leave them in the back of the plane, and then they can go off last after everyone else has deplaned. My personal opinion at that point, I said, look, honestly, I think it might be a better idea to just let them be where they are in the back of the plane. Let's not create the possibility of any more disturbance. Let's go ahead and deplane all the rest of the passengers as intended. Let's keep them in the back to the very end. And quite frankly, let's just get security in on this. You know, security is there for a reason. Airport security is there to help us out. So let's go ahead and have them take care of it. Have them deal with it. That is kind of their forte, and we take ourselves out of the equation. So my flight leader is like, you know what? That's a really good idea. Let's go ahead and do that. So that's exactly what we did. The rest of the flight, you know, we just kept an eye on them, making sure that they weren't doing anything crazy. Occasionally they would talk to each other, you know, even though we had instructed them not to, but whatever, it wasn't that big of a deal. They were calm, they had stayed in their seats, which was good. My flight leader had then gone in the back and told them exactly what was going to happen, that the plane was going to deplane, that they were to remain in their seats, and that personnel was going to come by and talk to them, right? And that's exactly what happened. So we had landed, we had deplaned the whole plane, and now it was time for security to get involved. Now all of our passengers have deplaned, and security has come on board to take the statements, if not the story, of our 2 passengers that are waiting in the back of the plane. Our pilots have come out of the flight deck and they are waiting in the jetway to see what the outcome is. And here's where things got a little interesting, because at this stage in the game, we make sure that our passengers are off, the plane is secure, and we basically head off to our shuttle so that we can then be taken to our hotel. So at this point, we actually stayed on board with security, letting them know our side of the story. Security wanted to know what had happened from our point of view. We told them everything. The pilots had actually come out and told them their side of the story as well from what they knew. And then ultimately they went to the back of the plane to speak with our 2 individuals to get their side of the story. This whole process, and this is where things are very, you know, not normal, is that at this point, we'd taken a solid hour that we were still on the plane after deplaning. At this point, it's probably about like 11 o'clock at night. Luckily, there were no more people getting on this plane for the day, so we had the plane to ourselves, but security wanted to know exactly what was going on, what the story was. And so ultimately, security brings these 2 individuals into the first class, where everything just becomes a big old like discussion, you know? So the pilots get involved, we, you know, back up our story. These 2 individuals tell their side of the story, which was, to be frank, very opposite to what it actually was in truth. But hey, you know, that's fine. So they did that, and that's what happened. We were there for another hour until all stories were collected by security. And then ultimately these 2 individuals were allowed to leave. Now, at this point, we didn't know what happened to these individuals. To this day, I still don't know what happened to these individuals, if they had received any disciplinary action, if there was anything that my airline did or the airport did. I have no idea, and quite frankly, I never will, and that's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. All I do know is that when there is a disturbance like this, when we have passengers that are become a little unruly, you know, it's a good thing to get, you know, your people to help you out. It's not just a one-man show. This is a team that takes care of the team, so that we're not left alone and we do everything as we're supposed to do, you know, cross our T's, dot our I's, etc., etc. So that is my crazy story on how this happened, that we had to actually kick out 2 individuals from first class that were paying individuals that were like frequent flyer people, that we had to send them all the way to the back of the plane because they were just misbehaving. Crazy. I mean, seriously, seriously crazy. Luckily, that has been the only time on my short career so far that anything like this has happened, and that is fine by me. If this is the only time that this happens in my career, I'm all the better for it. But again, I really had a hard time in deciding on whether I was going to share this story, but after a lot of thought, I thought, you know what, it's probably a good idea, because I want you guys to know, if you're thinking about becoming a flight attendant, if you're thinking about getting into the aviation industry on the commercial side, then it's a good idea for you to listen to the story, because unfortunately there's going to be a fair chance that you're going to come up with something similar to this. And knowing what you can do, knowing what you should do, is definitely going to be part of your arsenal in order to survive everything. Okay, guys, so that is my story for today. It was a crazy story. It was a experience, and it was definitely a learning opportunity on how to best handle unruly passengers. But I gotta say that the very first thing you gotta do is just approach all customers with patience, with respect, and be as polite as you possibly can. That is going to be 50% of you probably diffusing any situation for it to become any worse than it needs to be. So that has been my takeaway from everything. Well, guys, thank you very much again for being here. Again, this is Valencia Flyer. Go ahead and check out the rest of the videos. Subscribe if you like. Go ahead and leave me a comment. Any questions, I love to read them, every single one. Thank you so much for being a part of the community. We're almost hitting 1,000 subscribers, which for me is super, super exciting. So if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. And we will see you on the next one. All right, guys, have a wonderful day. Till then, take care.